Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Holly Ittel. I'm the Exhibitions and Quilt National Director here at the Dairy Barn Art Center. Today we will be speaking with Betty Hahn, LeAnn Hileman, Susan Bianchi, and Jill Kerttula. Each of them are current Quilt National artists. And excuse me, if you have a question for one of the artists, please drop it in the chat box and I will ask a question for the artists. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you could each just quickly introduce yourself. Susan, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Susan Bianchi. I live in Saratoga, California, where it is very early.
Betty?
Hi, I'm Betty Hahn. I live in Sun City, Arizona, and I'm only 15 minutes away from LeAnn.
LeAnn?
And I'm LeAnn Hileman. I'm Betty's neighbor, Betty's fan, and I live in Glendale, Arizona.
And I'm Jill Kerttula. I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I have lots of neighbors, but not either Betty or LeAnn.
Well, thanks for all being here. I'm still just trying to figure out how to, I've done this for what, a year and a half now. We all have Zoomed and I'm still struggling. But anyway, we will move on. So if you guys wanted to each speak briefly, or well, not briefly, you have about 10 minutes each to speak about your quilt, anything you'd like to share about it or share about yourself, please go ahead. So Susan, we'll start with you. Oh, hold on, let me get out of this presentation mode so that I can stay on your quilt while you're speaking.
Well, am I able to share screen too?
Oh yeah, sure. Why don't you go ahead and try and share it? Or I can stop sharing first. Okay, go ahead and try.
Okay. My quilt basically started here at the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio, which I just had to show you the architecture because it is just the weirdest place in the world. Inside, it is just a mass of layer and layer and layer of peeling paint and rust and just amazing decay. Why we went here is that this is where the movie The Shawshank Redemption was filmed, and that started that. This was one of my very favorite photos that my husband took when we were inside, and it really captured the peeling paint, what it used to look like, the feel. It was so dank, so cold, but you can see the dust on the edges that picks up that reflected blue paint and the really dark lighting. So this is where it started. I primarily work in Photoshop and an app called Percolator. Photoshop, everybody knows, is a photo editing tool that is phenomenal. Percolator is an app that only works on, I've just lost track of the English language, on my phone, on iPad, that kind of thing. And I bounce between the two. Percolator essentially is a mapping tool that separates the colors in photos into circles, a variety of things. It has a lot of filters. What I do is I bounce back and forth between those two apps, adjusting the lighting, trying to make sure that I get the depth and the appropriate lighting. What I have to do too is go back and forth and isolate certain things. Obviously, I edited out fire extinguisher plugs, things like that. But I had to go through and cut and paste certain portions and run it through the app to see if I could get a more defined detail. And then I layer all of the layers together to come up with a mapping thing. And then I print it out full size. I make the quilt sandwich, completely bind the edges, put the sleeve on, leave it loose because I'll be sewing on the top and the bottom of that. I use cotton, a black batting and a black stabilizer inside that. And then this is a current thing that I'm working on slowly, but that gives you a sense of how it prints out. And then I lay press and seal over that and mark where the locations of all of those circles are. I then transfer that to the top of the quilt sandwich and stitch through that. So this is the piece in progress at that point. This is my setup, which is instrumental to the working. So on the easel goes the reference photo, and I lay out sections on that reference photo. So there's foam core on the easel. This bottom piece is foam core that's braced with slats of wood held on by binder clips and a hole cut out of the middle, and that's what I sew through, and that supports the weight of the piece while I'm working. So you can kind of see that this is in progress there. I have tons of bead trays, more bags of colors, and dump them out as I need them. And if I don't have the appropriate colors, I paint, I dye, and in all else, if all else fails, pardon me, I make silicone molds of buttons and then make them out of polymer clay and match the colors that I need. So just so you get a better sense, on the left is the reference mapping photo that I had. On the right is what actually happens. So I use it as reference, but when you look at it full size, you know what sections hit you right, what don't. And I essentially use it for color reference and then change accordingly. I loved the wainscoting. I loved the colors that were in there. So I left that section alone, obviously changed the windows, some of the door. Ultimately, I changed these blue stripes too. So again, it's reference, but it's kind of vital too. This is another reason I love working this way, is the layers of the buttons and the beads. And I love being able to look at it close up and see all of the individual character of the buttons and just how quirky and wonderful they are and the texture. And I love the back because it's absolute chaos and the front is so orderly. And I think several people had suggested I probably should cover it up, and I just can't bring myself to do that because I like it. So this was the first piece that I actually kept track of as far as counting how many were on it before I had done rough estimates. And this one, it was 32,260. I know there were more than that because my deal was if I lost count, I had to start back at one. So made it a game. And that is the finished piece.
Wow, thank you. It's so neat to see the in progress photos. Let's see, who's next? Betty, would you like to speak about your artwork?
No. Yes, I'd be happy to.
Screen share again?
I beg pardon?
Would you like me to share the
Yes,
image?
please. Yes, I'd like you to share because I don't do screen share. I have no idea how to do that. And I'm computer literate, but I'm not yet Zoom literate. This is a portrait I did of myself. And I actually did it for Beyond the Mirror, which was a Sakwa call. And I wear red glasses. I love my red glasses. And I tried a couple of things. I work on my iPad in an app called Artrage, and I actually tried just sort of using a photograph and kind of playing with drawing over the photograph. That wasn't happy at all. And finally, I just decided, well, I'm just going to go ahead and play. And I'm going to show you how I play. This is my iPad, and this is an app called Artrage. And on this side, you can see there are lots of tools. And I wish I had a screen share of this, but you're going to have to just buy Artrage and play with it. It costs $4. it has the tools on this side. It has a color wheel down here in the bottom corner, and the outer ring is hue and the inner ring is value. So you can take a color and go all the way from white to black in each color range. And then you just take a tool and pick a color, and I've got blue picked. I'm going to poke, oh, I've already got the oil paint tube. The oil paint tube is interesting. I'm going to pull it up here. As I go across, it makes what looks like a big oil paint line, and I can change the size of that down at the bottom. It's only 20% right now. If I change that to 100% and then do it again, now I'll have a big squiggly thing that is very dimensional. So you actually get shadows in it. You can see that it looks like oil that's been squeezed out of a tube, and I like to use that a lot. So this is how my iPad paintings happen. And the one you're looking at on the screen is one of my iPad paintings. So what I did was I just sort of flipped some glasses shapes on there with red lines and orange lines. And then you can fill in background colors. If you have a defined line, you can fill that shape in with a different color with something called a fill tool. And I use that a lot. Like all of the lines you see started out as just lines with probably no color in the shape. And then I go in with a fill tool and color that in with a color until I get what I like. And occasionally those things will fracture. So behind me, you can see iPad paintings that have become silk quilts. And let me get one. This is what it looks like after it's been sent to the printer. And he prints it on a big Epson printer. I drive 45 minutes, fast as I can get there, and arrive to discover that my little 12x9 painting that I did is now 36 by 52. So they become large and very soft and flexible. The silk is delicious. I love working with this silk. It can't be quilted on like this. It needs to have a back layer of fusible interfacing. And I use Pellon P44 interfacing, which is an iron-on interfacing. You stretch this out on an ironing surface with pins. And I have put interfacing on the top before and gone, oh, wait, whoops. So this is where you put the interfacing. Had to take it all apart, realign it. I line it up with a long, with a 36-inch Olfa ruler to make sure that it's straight and square before I put the interfacing on, because that will keep it true. And as you can see, this is so drapey. If I got started quilting, I would have puddles of silk. And I quilt on a mid-arm machine on a long arm frame that I'm going to extend to 10 feet now that I've rearranged my studio. And the piece that you see right there is my current piece that I'm working on for a group we started last year called 4 Common Corners. We are artists in the 4 corner states of New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and we're still looking for someone in Utah. If you're in Utah and you want to join us, give me a jingle. All of these pieces all started on my iPad. I love color. I love playing with color. I love seeing how color reacts, each color to the next. I very infrequently change a color once I put it on the iPad. Usually the color I pick is kind of what I want. And it's a very specific tool. It shows you a little circle of exactly the color you're going to get. So I encourage you all to get the Artrage app and join me in this fun adventure of painting with no mess. I can paint with pastels and not have icky fingers. I can paint with watercolor and not have it drip anywhere. It is a fun app. I've been using it probably 5 or 6 years. For most of my quilts, I also paint on silk. I paint on cotton. I paint on canvas. I paint on walls. I was a faux finisher for 30 years, and a designer hired me to do all of her custom art and all of her decorated walls in millionaires' homes. So I've had quite an interesting life. That's me.
Wow, that's great, Betty. Thank you. Could you tell us what the Pelon number is again?
I think it's P44F. It's lightweight fusible. Don't get featherweight. It's heavier. Go figure. That was a man's decision, I think. Yeah, featherweight, not good. Lightweight, fusible interfacing. It's non-woven, and it works great. What you do is you lay the fusible side down on the back of your quilt. It comes in 20-inch wide sections. So I lay the section across the width of my quilt and go 20 inches with it. And you put parchment paper on top of that. I have a fabulous new cordless iron that is a Power XL, which I hadn't ever heard of, but I got it on Amazon, tried it, and it's fabulous. It's big and heavy, and it holds its heat longer than the previous one that I used. So what you do is you just iron it on as if you're putting on contact paper in a drawer. You start at one side, you work your way down, you move over, and you make sure that everything stays smooth underneath your parchment paper and that your fusible interfacing stays smooth. If you get a wrinkle in it, while it's still warm, you can pull it back. So check regularly. If you get a bubble, go over it again. That's it. Easy peasy.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. LeAnn, would you like to speak about your quilt? And do you need to screen share?
Yeah, I will need to screen share. I'm LeAnn Hileman. I live in Glendale, Arizona, which used to be an agricultural town, now is more or less a suburb of Phoenix. And I work out of my home. I've got one of our third bedroom is my sewing studio. It's almost too small to call a studio, but so I call it my sewing room. And I will work in that room, but I generally am spreading all over to other places too. So let me see here. I want to get the right view, speaker view. Okay. So my spreading to other rooms means the dining room for cutting, and how come I'm dining room for cutting, and then design walls wherever I can put them. So most of my work is done on the design wall, and I'm going to rotate here a little bit so that you can actually see. There's my design wall. And I generally work on large pieces because I like to do a lot of detail. And I was one of those kids that was always bored in school. And so I am self-taught in pretty much everything. And my way of learning is to just dig in and learn as much as I can. So I think that translates into the quilts that I do, because I love doing big pieces with lots of detail. So let me do a screen share. I'm going to show you some photographs of where my quilt started. You see, there it is. Okay. So my quilt, Where Once a Tree Was Standing, came from photographs that I took. We were on our way to a little vacation for a weekend in Bisbee, Arizona. And this is somewhere south. We got lost. It's past Tucson, or past Tombstone on the way to Bisbee. And a friend of mine had been looking for windmills. So my eye was attuned to windmills, and I spotted this one. And you can see that it was just a dry old field, and it had a nice little tank, watering tank. And obviously it had been occupied by cows because it had lots of dried cow patties. So I don't seem to be able to get those other ones up. Let me bring it up again. There it is. Okay. So this is that photograph. In my quilt, in the foreground is the fallen tree, which is clear over here. So what I had to do was do a 360 walk around that windmill to get all of those aspects. And I work only almost exclusively from my own photographs. Of course, the challenge in doing that is getting everything to scale. And so could you pull mine up now, Holly?
Sure.
Okay, so I work from my own photographs and I am always taking photographs. So I have a bank of photographs that I work with. And the challenge with this one was combining the different perspectives and getting them all into one scene. I call my style narrative realism because it is realistic, but I generally am telling some kind of a story, either through the landscape or through characters. And I almost call it a scene because I'm not satisfied with just getting one figure. I have to get the background, the scene, and I often will do a lot of researching and historical, looking into the history of items. For example, I've one in Houston that's going to be in Houston. It's called Navajo Boy with Truck. And it's taken, I think, in probably the early 1950s. It had an old gas tank, the gravity powered gas tank. And so I looked at hundreds of pictures online to be able to get actually the structure of it. And one of the things that I'm most fascinated with and what keeps me challenged is depicting light and shadow. And so in order to do that, I have to know the structure of the item the element that I'm working with, whether it's that tree that's down or the windmill, which you see has the right side of that windmill is lighter in color, which indicates the sun shining on it. So often what I'll do is once I get that photograph cropped and edited, which I use Paint Shop Pro, then I will trace it onto paper and get as much detail as I can. And often I'll use perhaps a 16 by 20 size. Once I get that done, then I can take it to my local shop and get it enlarged to whatever size I want it to be. And generally determining the size, I use a trick of Susan Carlson's, and she says that the smallest piece should be no smaller than your pinky fingernail. So I use that also. So for example, one that I had, the smallest piece was about that size, and I enlarged it. I needed that piece to be at least 3 times as big as it was. So the whole piece I got enlarged by 300%. So they can get quite large, which to me is really fun. And I generally am working on one piece anywhere from 4 months to 9 or 10 months. So it becomes part of my living situation. And my studio practice is that I'm there 5 to 6 days a week and 4 to 7 hours a day. So a good day is about 6 hours. I love getting 6 hours in. Let's see what else. So once I get that enlargement done, that's my master drawing. I'm always referring back to it. And then I cut out, I work one element at a time. So for example, in this one, I started with the mountains, constructed those first, got them on. And then although sometimes I say in classes that you should start from the center out, I also have a caveat. If something fascinates me, I just go do that because I can't not do it. I just go. And whatever fascinates me is what I work on. And then I work from there. So in this particular piece, I really had my doubts about whether it was going to be anything good at all until I got that windmill up. Once I got the windmill up, it was all fine, but it was pretty dreary until I got that windmill going. I said in my artist statement that this was kind of a pandemic piece, but it had a couple factors. The pandemic was getting going. My son had gotten his PhD and was moving to a further location. And I had just finished that big piece, Navajo Boy, that I'd worked on for 9 months. And, you know, when you finish a big piece, it's like you're losing your kid. So this was kind of my expression of that. And by the time I got the windmill up, my hope was back. Everything was good again. So for me, it was kind of a therapeutic piece. So I do work element by element, and I use freezer paper to draw my templates. My perception out of it is changing all the time because I'm referring back to that photograph hundreds of times. And by the 100th time, I see a lot more than I did the first time. So I also apply the fabric the same way. I don't have any idea what fabric, well, I have some idea what fabrics I'll use, but that's subject to change always. I do use commercial fabrics mostly, although I use some hand-dyed fabrics of other people. Just this summer, I dabbled a bit in hand dyeing, but I'll probably not do a lot of that because I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit trail, hobby. You know, how many can you have? How much storage do you have? And so I probably won't do too much of that, but it is really fun. And I do almost all fabric and very little painting, although I'm experimenting a little bit with the Inktense pencils and a little bit of painting. But mostly, my medium is fabric. I love fabric. So that's how I started doing this. And I love to play with it. It's just so tactile. And I think that it actually creates that third dimension. And that's what I love about the art quilts, is that they are two-dimensional, but they have that third dimension, that depth, which is what I love. So once I get my top filled in, then I can go on to detailing, which is really fun too. And of course, I love detail. Do some thread painting. You'll see in the middle ground here, there's some thread painting that's done in the back end, in the bottom section of the windmill. There's a lot of bushes and shrubs that have grown up in there. And so the thread painting, I'll use different weights of thread, different types of thread. And actually, the question is it all raw edge applique? I use both raw edge and turned edge. I use more turned edge than raw edge, but all of my work is image driven. And by that, I mean that if it's in the background has less texture. And so I will always want to use a turned edge, or if at least something that's very muted. In the foreground, I might want to have more texture, and so I might use raw edge. And given the fact that I'm working with fabric as my medium, there's times when you have to use raw edge because it's just too ravelly to not. And sometimes you want the texture, sometimes you don't. So I also use cheesecloth or tulle or organza or whatever I can throw in there is what I use, because it's all image driven. I'm expressing that image is what's important, not really the materials that I use. So I am self-taught, as I said, and as I said in my artist statement, I've had lots of roads half traveled in my life, whether it's law school or writing poetry or whatever. So this is kind of the next obsession that I have. I will often quilt in sequence. In this particular piece, I quilted the sky before I went on. So I had half of it quilted for most of the progress of this quilt, because I needed to be able to put the detail on top of the texture of the sky. And the sky actually has some felt and some one-to-under interfacing quilted into it for the clouds. The binding, I like to do the, but I like bindings, first of all. I love other people's facings, but I just don't like them on my quilts. I've done them and they don't feel right to me on mine. So what I do on my bindings, I always try to match up the binding with the piece. And you'll see that the fabric from the piece, you can especially see it on the left-hand side in the mid-ground. You can see that it flows out into the binding, which takes more time, but it finishes it without detracting from the image. And again, my pieces are image driven. So the quilting I do is generally echo quilting, but I do the thread painting, of course. I've lately stopped using Steam-A-Seam 2 because it's just too hard to do any fancy quilting on it. So my pieces are secured on there in various ways, again, depending on how it's going to work with glue or fusible, using Misty Fuse usually, pins, lots of pinning, and stitching. I will often stitch pieces down with 100-weight silk thread, just because it's very invisible. And so by the time I get it up on the wall or get it up to the machine to quilt, a lot of it is, it's all stitched down and secure, which it has to be because they're usually large. And if I don't have them really secure, they start popping up, and then you're constantly, it's like that game where you're pounding down the mole. It's like you've got to be secured or it's just a mess. So I think that's all I can say about my quilt, but let me just give you, I'm going to just rotate my computer here so you can see a little bit of my room. So if you want to take that down, Holly.
Sure.
Okay, so there's a piece that I'm working on now called Main Street Bonaparte. Let me move a little bit closer. And that one I used my own hand-dyed fabrics for the sky. And I have a design wall that basically covers that whole wall, thank goodness. My husband rigged it up and also is very well lit. This is a really small room. But it works for me. And I know myself, if I had a bigger room, I just have more stuff. So this works for me. And I think that's all I have to say. I think that kind of covers it.
Well,
Thanks.
great. Thank you. Jill, would you like to speak about your piece, please?
Sure, why don't you put it up first and I'll talk a little bit, and then if people change to speaker view, I will take you on, you can see a bigger shot of me and I can take you around my studio a little bit. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this specific piece because the Dairy Barn did a great job of doing videos of each one of us talking about our piece. And so if you want to go on YouTube and check out the Dairy Barn videos of the artist talks, I talk pretty much in depth about this piece. But a couple things I want to allude to what some of the earlier people talked about. LeAnn, two things that you talked about really resonated with me. One is about how the piece is image driven, and I'll get into that a little more, but very much image driven because again, it's all based on my own photography. And so by the time I start the quilt, I've been through layers and layers of compositional changes and ideas and color and choices and photography before I get that far. So to me, that is the image driving it. But the second thing that you said that really resonated with me was you're talking about 3D. People ask me, why do I do tactile for textiles? And I say, it's because I can touch my work. I used to oil paint and I'd be oil paint from head to toe, including my mouth by the time I got done with it. I'd be pointing my brushes and I knew I'd die if I just kept going on that. So one of the things I love about working with textiles is there isn't a millimeter of any of my work that has not gone through my hands and that my hands have touched and my hands have sculpted. And I very much feel that my work is sculpted because it takes it into, as you said, the third dimension of texture, and really it's something that, you know, people say, well, why you got the photograph? What do you just stitch on the photograph? No, I don't just stitch on the photograph. I give it that third dimension, and every stitch on there, that photograph would not work without the stitching. The stitching would not work without the photograph. They have to both be there. This particular piece is a little different than most of my pieces. Most of my pieces are what is the photographic equivalent of a whole cloth quilt. I just use one specific photo and work with it. I very often have not done any Photoshop or Lightroom work on it or any other things, because that's what I feel that my fabric and stitching do. My fabric and stitching are what changes the photo into the final piece. And so this piece was a little different because I did do a little bit more Photoshop work. There were a couple layers of Photoshop within it, because I think there's 3 or 4 different photos of mine that are combined to make this. But then again, like the people on the left-hand side that with the shopping bags, the people with the umbrellas on the top, they weren't in the photograph at all. They're either appliqued organza or painted or something else beside it. The photo itself that was printed, the printed piece was black and white. And so all the color that's on there is either the big arrows are appliqued fabric, some of it's paint, some of it's organza, it's all that. So again, you can see where the photograph is an underlying sketch only for the finished piece. Even if you look above the woman's yellow hat, you can see some texture there. That's about 4 layers of fabric on top of the photo. There's a lace layer, there's an organza layer, there's a tulle layer, so I guess it's 3, and then stitched to give that very specific texture. In a lot of the areas, I'll cut through the photo because I'll have layers underneath the fabric that come to show through. So again, it's that carving into it, adding on top of it, stitching, both hand and machine stitching, so I can get the very variable textures that I want. So now if you want to move to speaker view, and I will take you on a little bit of a walk through my, let's see. I don't know why it's showing Holly instead of me, but anyway, this is the start of a piece that I'm working on now. For the first time in my life, I have a design wall. I've never had a design wall before, but I just put this one up in my studio. And you can see with this one here, what I'm doing is there's about a dozen different photos that I've had printed out. And I will take those and applique them together to make the final piece. And this is actually only about 2/3 of what the final piece will be. It's going to be about 10 foot long and about 4 foot high when it's done. One of the nice things about doing the type of work that I have is that this is my entire stash over here, as opposed to people who have to have a huge stash of different fabrics. I use very little pieces of fabric. So I just have it all like my paints would be in there. My studio is in an old schoolhouse in Charlottesville, Virginia. This was evidently a 3rd grade classroom. So I'll step back and you can see how lucky I am to have this entire huge studio all to myself, including the old blackboards that were here for the school kids. I do a lot of drawing as well, because I think that as an artist, what we do mostly is to see. It doesn't matter whether we're a painter or we're a fabric artist or a photographer, we have to train our eye. And so over here is a whole lot of my sketches that I also have that I sketch people as they're sitting, drinking their coffee and on their phone, and they don't know I'm sketching them, so I'm sketching them. These are some of my other work, and this particular piece here, I wanted to show you because it is a photo of my grandson, which is enough to want to show it to you. But what it really is the photo was printed on organza, so it's very see-through. But then what I did was basically an entire piece quilt underneath the organza and then stitched over it. So that's when you see up here these squares, each of those different colors is caused by the organza underneath that. A lot of the additional shading was the organza underneath that. And so I use probably 4 different fabrics depending on what I want the end result to be. If I want it to be very detailed, very colorful, very muted, depends on what kind of fabric that I ask them to print it on. Here's a good example from the side of when I talk about sculptural. This is one of my pieces that was actually started as a photo of a piece of a wall here at the studio, but you can see how much trapunto is involved in that one and how it's the studio or the wall happens. So not only do I have a good studio, but I also have been able to have a good gallery space within my studio. I recently took 6 months off and sublet my studio to another artist, a printmaker. And during that time, I did no fiber art, and it was wonderful. I really spent a lot of time focusing on photography. I spent time focusing on drawing. I've been doing life drawing classes and so on and so forth. And it has really made me a better fiber artist in the long run by, again, teaching my eye and just exposing me to new ways of thinking and new ideas that I can pull into my artwork. So again, if you go on that YouTube thing, I stood on the top of the parking lot where I took the pictures that were in my Quilt National piece. There's a parking ramp downtown here that's about 4 stories high. And that's where I took the pictures for that one. And that's also where I gave my artist talk from. So you can go and hear more of it from there. So I think that's all I have to say.
Sorry, I muted myself. Thanks, Jill. So this is a question for all 4 of the artists. Let me get back into a different view so I can see you. People are really curious about, for each of you actually, if you used, well, and some of you already spoke about this, your reference images, but also your design process, which I guess you've all spoken about. But maybe Betty, you could talk about this. When you are drawing, is it just a free expression of that moment, or are you trying to draw for a specific quilt in your finished piece? You know, maybe that's not a clear question.
Well, the self-portrait that I did for Beyond the Mirror, which was rejected by this Sackwood, you know, and after she rejected it, we entered into the period of COVID, and I always every year enter Quilt National, and I have a huge stack of the letters that say "Dear Entrant." They don't have your name in the email. They just say, "Dear Entrant, blah, blah, blah. Your piece was great, but you know, there were 864 pieces better than yours, but keep entering because, you know, it helps support us." And we've all gotten those fabulous reject letters. Well, I decided I would enter Quilt National again, looking at what I could enter. I thought, well, that quirky self-portrait that I did that's so gloomy, that isn't me at all, might be kind of fun to enter. So I my best friend, who is an artist and a fiber artist, said, "Oh, I don't like that one at all. I don't think you should send that one." So I said, "Well, whatever, I'm going to do it anyway." So I did send it in. But that one was, the process for that was finding elements of me and simplifying it on. So I'm going to show you now with my my iPad. I can take something I've just done and eliminate it. So here I am backing up. Now I can put them back in if I decide I want it back in, but I can back up and do things with it very spontaneously and yet with a lot of thought. So as I was drawing my own image, I did the scoop shape of the glasses with red just on a probably lime green background. That's probably what I started with. You can start with, I can't go back there. You start with a color, and it can be any color, but then if you decide, no, you would rather have orange, then you pick orange down here in the bottom and just touch it, and now it's orange. So it's that easy to like make a mistake on a grand scale. Like the whole background, if I had painted it, would be horrible to have to repaint. And I do paint on canvases. I love painting on canvases, and I love repainting things. This, though, for me is so spontaneous and quick. I am a realist. I can paint realism. I can duplicate anything. I could always do a Mickey Mouse that I looked at that was 2 inches high and paint him 4 feet high and have him be exact. That's just in my brain. I can just do that. I can duplicate something easily. So I never wanted to do that. I wanted to do something that took much more effort. And for me, that's abstract. Abstract is more effort than just copying something. And it's more effort than I love quilting. So combining the abstract of my iPad and then the 35 or 50 hours of quilting that I do on a 36 by 52 inch silk is what just totally keeps me happy. People say, well, how long did that take? And I'll just say, well, I don't know. It was one happy minute after another. And I'm good with that. Every minute is happy or maybe unhappy. If I'm having to do ripping, I can make that happy or unhappy depending on how I look at it. It's happy because I'm going to fix it. So I try not to have negative thoughts. And that's what's so funny about the self-portrait, because just after I entered that, my husband had a stroke. And then while he was having his heart repaired, I actually caught COVID at the hospital the day I was there for his surgery. So this last year turned out to be that kind of gloomy looking Betty that's in the self-portrait. And that was a person I hadn't seen in 77 years. So an interesting year for sure. And interesting that that piece got selected for Quilt National.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. That is really interesting. I think it's funny that your friend advised you not to submit it, and that's the one that got selected.
Yeah, she had to buy me lunch.
That's a good friend, I suppose. So each four of you are working in a unique process to yourself, something that you've mastered or are working on mastering, depending on how you feel about your progress in this process. And I am curious, what difficulties have you had working in your specific process? What have you learned along the way that you would like to share?
I think for me, one of the processes which I've embraced that was difficult is I have a graphic design background. So I spent the whole 40 years of my life trying to make things which are reproduced on paper look perfect. And so the first couple of times I started getting photographs reproduced on fabric, I realized A, the resolution is down, and B, there's a juiciness to fabric that isn't there on painting or on paper. So it's just not going to happen. And I have totally embraced that part of it by saying, okay, fabric, okay, photo, you're just the basis of what I'm going to do. I'm not going to try to make you look like a photograph. And I think that I try and tell people that who want to get their photo, they have a fabulous photo and they want to get it printed on fabric for some reason. I don't know why, because they love the photograph so much. Well, if you love the photograph, let it be a photograph. If you're going to get it printed on fabric, have an ulterior motive to that. Why are you getting it printed on fabric? And for me, getting it printed on fabric was to do something that cannot be done with photography, and that is texture. So it was sort of the hard part of it was understanding the limitations of the media that I have chosen. And the same thing with, I reject most technology. I do not like technology. And so I don't print my own work because I don't want to have to deal with the printer. And I don't want to deal with a lot of photo manipulation ahead of time because I don't want to do that. I did all that stuff for 40 years. Now I want to get back to the hands-on tactile simplicity of direct communication with my art.
It's interesting how you've, yeah, I like what you say about wanting to have that direct hands-on connection, and then versus what Betty's doing. Is really interesting having these conversations of these two different styles of working. Yeah. LeAnn, Sue, what about you two?
Oh, thank you. I really was holding myself back. I wanted to jump in there. Jill, you are talking my language. I love your textures that you use. That is just fabulous. And I'm so glad you talked about it because now I see it more in your piece, more than I did before. So that's fantastic. Going back to the drawing thing, for me, I don't draw from just out of my imagination anymore because I'm so engaged with the pieces that I'm doing, but I used to when I was younger. But for example, I did a piece called The Musicians, which is a large piece. It was from my own photograph of a couple of guys in San Diego playing classical music in front of the museum. And it was it's a beautiful quilt, if I have to say so myself. But the challenge was getting those hands as they were on instruments. One had a guitar, the other one had a cello. And it was so fascinating to get the anatomy of hands. Hands always fascinated me anyway. And so I drew those hands over and over again. Then when I did Navajo Boy, which is more recent, again, I had one of his hands totally expresses the whole tone of the piece. So I drew those over and over and over again just to understand the musculature, the skeleton underneath that skin. And I had to know that in order to get the light and shadow correct. So my drawing is about that. And I did a commission piece of a Chinese gentleman who was 93 years old from a passport photo, and trying to get the skeleton and the musculature of an Asian man, a Chinese man of that age from a tiny little photo. I drew it several times, as you can imagine, and I actually constructed the face more than once, totally constructed it and tore it down because the color was wrong. So for me, that drawing is a tool, but I love what you're doing, Jill, with sketching the people. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, the drawing the people and drawing the life drawing. I proctor life drawing every week here at the Art Center, and it has really helped me a lot with my photographs. And to when I'm going to stitch my photographs, like you say, to try and get somebody's expression, you have to understand where expression comes from. And so from doing the life drawing and knowing the curves of an arm and knowing the curves of whatever helps you immensely in whatever media you're doing. Yep.
Yeah.
Sue, what about you? What have you learned along the way of the process that you work in?
I'm fascinated with the engineering of every piece that we work on. And a lot of my work is done in my head prior to actually even beginning. Generally, it's rare that I work from a specific photo just because the photo speaks to me. A lot of times you conceptualize something in your head and then you go in search of a photo, or, you know, again, put elements together. I truthfully love technology. I love embracing that as part of the extension. It absolutely does not replace the hands-on experience, because once you start translating that to the quilting aspect or attaching buttons or the construction of anything, it changes. You know, I can show you my graveyard pile of pieces started. A piece that I finished recently, actually I had worked on for months and then put it aside and came back to it and literally took off half of a quilt's worth of buttons and beads and started again because it was not working and had to rework it. And again, I think it's what I love about this is the patience. When you know a piece speaks to you, you know it's a good idea, and just having the patience to keep coming back and working at it and knowing, analyzing what's wrong with it and what's right with it and what you need to do. A lot of I do other things other than the beads and button things, but what really attracts me on the bead and button things are, while you're in the process of it, it's a study in value. And just understanding sometimes that color is not important, but the value is, and playing with that. And so I find it immensely satisfying.
We have two questions for you, Sue. What got you started using the buttons and beads so heavily on your quilts?
Actually, it was my husband. He is a photographer. He discovered the Percolator app and had, oh gosh, a decade ago, run it through and showed it to me. And he goes, "This should be a quilt." His idea was to get paisley fabric and do it. And I was, no, absolutely not. But I had not collected buttons at that point and just decided, okay, let's see if that would work. And so it was a lot of information gathering. I think it took, you know, definitely over 6 months, close to a year to get the first piece done, finding what was appropriate, learning that you had to paint things and solving each problem as it came up. But, and he's responsible, and I just liked the process. And he was indulgent in letting me collect a crap load of paint, you know, as far as all the buttons and beads. So.
Very neat. And then how much would you say your quilt, for example, in Quilt National weighs? It's pretty heavy.
I think it's around 10 pounds.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that's where that one is. Yeah.
What I would say too.
Yeah, I think I weighed it, and then I don't retain things. So if it's written down somewhere and then I forgot to look it up, yeah.
And Diane is asking, what type of paint do you use on your buttons?
Generally, I stick to model paint. I have used automotive paint as long as you have a respirator. That's cool, but yeah, primarily those are the two.
Good. Do the four of you have questions for each other?
I have a totally unrelated question to Susan. You have the most lovely little tiny painting right behind you. Did you paint that?
Which one? Wait a minute. Which side?
Right behind your head. It's just a little tiny one with a house. House in it. Yeah.
This one is actually one of my husband's photographs.
Oh, that's beautiful. Tell him I love it.
He's really good.
Sorry for the divergent, but I need
No, that's okay.
You all were
LeAnn,
talking about
LeAnn, do you do a lot when you're photographing, how does photography fit into life for you? Like, do you photograph and then get inspiration for your quilts, or are you, do you go back into your photographs to find inspiration, or at what point do the two merge in your process?
Who were you direct?
You.
Oh, me? Okay. I photograph just everything all the time. I'm looking for something really unusual in line, a good diagonal line for energy. I'm looking for interaction between people or person and a critter, something interesting. And when I see it, it glows, and it will not let me go. It haunts me sometimes for a couple years before I execute it. So I know that that's something that has to be done. But then I do go back and like have one right now that's in my head. It's just bothering me so much. And it has to do with a photograph I took maybe 3 years ago. And then I keep adding on. It was a trip from Phoenix over to San Diego. And it's just going to bother me till I die. I think I have to do it next. I just have to do it.
Yep.
Betty, I think you had a question.
Yeah, well, everybody assumes that I just do abstracts. I want to show you something that this is my favorite quilt I ever did.
Oh, yeah.
This is painted on silk with Tsukineko inks from a collection of photographs that I gathered online. And I was scared to death to try this because everything is scary before you actually do it. And then when you get into it, it's like, oh, why was I afraid of this? This is so much fun. But I fell in love with this Black woman. It's Mary Bethune McLeod. And she is a famous woman. But I did a whole series I did 3 of these for Suzanne Miller-Jones, her story, our story, her story, I did both of them. So I also do portraits. So I kind of go all the way from one end to the other. And when I went through the process to become a juried art member of SACWA, the hardest thing for me was to figure out who I was. And that was a wonderful experience. I encourage everybody, if you haven't done that yet, investigate yourself, figure out who you are, collect a body of work. I did figure out I had about 3 bodies of work.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy all 3 of them. And I don't put myself out as I'm just an abstract artist. I am kind of a kaleidoscope. I
Betty,
enjoy all different kinds of things.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I have a question for all of you, and it also is something I'm working through, is what battings do you use? I've tried wool, silk, bamboo, cotton, and thermore, and I'm still looking for the perfect one. What do you use?
I use warm and natural for no particular reason, other than I have always used warm and natural. I have tried, I tried felt at one point, but it was too hard of a hand
Not
to it.
conventional.
So I like the warm and natural because I can add as many layers as I want if I'm going to trompato or if I'm going to do whatever to it. So, but no real reason.
Susan?
I use warm and natural as well, except for the black batting, which I was trying to remember. It's a cotton poly because they don't make black batting in anything other than a blend. But yeah, I think it's Quilter's Dream, but I'm not 100%
They
sure.
have black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's decent. Yeah.
And I use Hobbs battings. I use 80-20 for the underlayer, and then I use a layer of Tuscany wool on top. Because with the silk, if you do dense quilting and then leave a space that isn't quilted, you get fabulous trapunto. Without doing any trapunto, you get a wonderful dimension where you haven't done any stitching at all. So the wool fills in the space so that the silk never looks droopy in that spot where you didn't put any quilting. It just pumps it up. And of course, these are never going to be washed, so it doesn't matter, in terms of how washable they are. But I've also used wool bats in children's quilts, baby quilts, and they're fabulous. They stay
Thank you.
comfy and wonderful.
Betty, I have a question for you. In your figurative works, do you use the same or similar design process? Do you use the same iPad program?
No, I don't use my iPad at all when I paint. I use it to collect photographs. So for this one, I collected photographs from the internet, and they do print those out in various sizes, and then I use that size and basically kind of just sketch the outline onto the silk with a little micron pen. And I chose to do all of these in sepia, gray, and white and black so that the three pieces would be happy together. But I also loved the way those colors worked for this beautiful Black woman. I used the same colors for the one of my mother, and that's this one. So I did a portrait of my mom, and those of you who know her, I was terrified to try to do a photograph of my mom onto silk. But then I like to say, when I'm painting, I'm not doing it. I don't have any feeling of having done it. I don't have any feeling while I'm doing it that I'm in control. I use thought processes that are just there, and I watch it become. It is a magical, amazing process. And I'm terrified to do the next one because I don't believe it's going to happen again, and I don't know how to do it. Does that make any sense? It just, something just happened. I know it's all in me and I'm doing it, but it never feels like I have physically done it. When I'm doing these abstract things, it feels like I did it. When I'm doing portraits, it's like something else takes over.
There's a wonderful quote by Georgia O'Keeffe that says, "I make art like cows eat grass."
Exactly.
It's just natural. You just do it.
It just happens.
Wow.
So no, two different kinds of processes. One is just playing with paint freely on my iPad and taking things out, adding things in. Every time you hit the fill tool, it does serendipitous things. The piece behind me, the one that looks like the rings of a tree. I have a website, bettyhahnfiberarts.com. You can go there and see everything I've done, and you can pull them up and look at the detail. When you see a section that's got several colors of paint in it, I didn't do that. I clicked the fill tool and I clicked a color, and it magically sort of just sculptures that with different colors. So some of it I leave in, some of it I take out. There are a lot of thought processes. It isn't a fast and furious kind of thing. It's deliberative. But I get a lot of serendipity, which I don't get with the paintbrush.
Yeah, great. And sorry, could you tell us again what kind of silk you use?
I use silk that's made by Jacquard and sold by Dharma. It is on a roll that's 40 inches wide, comes from China. The last 2 rolls I bought because we thought there were going to be tariffs and bad things happening. And each roll cost me $450. It's about 40 yards on a roll. You can get, it's paper-backed. And the portrait that I did, I used the paper on the silk to give it some stability. So it does all kinds of funny things when the ink goes through the silk onto the paper, it wrinkles up and sometimes gives me some little bonus things on there. But the paper rips off easily. Silk is the sturdiest fabric in the entire world. Oh, great. Mailman. Mailman dog. It's easy to paint on. I have not investigated whether you can get paper-backed silk in smaller batches than 40 yards because I wasn't interested. I send my roll of paperback silk right up to the printer, and he uses my own roll of silk. But I bought extra, so I work on some here. I paint on silk. A piece that I just got accepted into fur, feathers, fangs, and fins was all hand painted on silk with a brush painting a million little dots and then quilting around all the million little dots, all of which was totally fun.
Great, neat. Well, each week we update our People's Choice votes that our visitors cast while they're in our gallery. And LeAnn and Sue, both of your quilts are currently in the running for the
Oh my
People's Choice
gosh.
Award.
How cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Congrats. So I have a question for you two. What do you think attracts our viewers to your piece? Or what do you think is evoked in the viewer when they see it?
I'll talk about that for a minute. My piece, Where Once a Tree Was Standing, I've posted that on Facebook in progress and as it is finished. I get so many comments. Oh, this is just like I remember this from Mexico, from Kansas, from South Africa. There's a universal aspect to it that I think speaks to people, and whether it's touching a memory or there's just something universal about it. And that's when I know I've hit my target, when I get that kind of reaction. That's more fun than any judge's comment or any ribbon on the wall or any money prize. That's what I work for.
That's great. My parents had that experience when they came to see Quilt National. Your quilt was both of my parents' favorite because my grandpa just recently passed away, and he what's the word I'm looking for? Refurbished antique windmills, and so we have windmills.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, I reminded them of grandpa and home and the farm, and yeah, that's great. And Sue, what about you?
I think number one, it's probably the different material that's used, that it is unique in that way. And I would like to think it's the way of viewing it. When you're close up, really, you can kind of tell what the image is, but this is one of those processes, the further away you are, the better it gets. Because it does assume a dimensionality that is not obvious when you are up close. And so you can view it a couple different ways. So I think it's fascinating in that regard.
Yeah, and yours really glows in the gallery. Does. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great. Well, thank you guys for all being here. If there's any last comments or questions, anyone? Okay. Well, Quilt National will be at the Dairy Barn until Monday, Labor Day, September 6th. And for the past couple weeks, I've been telling everyone that we'll have a closing reception on Friday the 4th, but Friday is actually September 3rd, is the closing reception. And we currently have Flora, Fauna, and Landscape by Chile Quilting and the Textile Artists of Southeast Ohio here at the Dairy Barn, along with Quilt National, of course. Reservations are not required. You can walk on into the gallery. We have other events, some upcoming workshops, and every Friday for the rest of the summer, we'll be having these Q&As. The registrations for the next few weeks have not opened yet, but I will be sending an email to everyone who's registered this weekend prior. We'll receive an email about registering for the next few weeks, and you'll see that in your inbox soon. So thank you all for being here, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.